didn't know I could sing. Hello and welcome to Ellroy Reads. This is a show where every week we look at a book that was highly inspirational to James Ellroy, a book that influenced him and moved him and thrilled him and in some ways made him the author he is today. And the book for this week's episode, if you haven't already guessed it, is Goddess on Marilyn Monroe by Anthony Summers. This was a huge book when it was published in 1985. It's been revised and reprinted many times, and I'll go into a little bit of how it was highly influential to James Ellroy. Both at various stages of his career, he has come back to it time and time again. Okay, so a little bit of background. Anthony Summers is an Irish journalist, a very urbane, sophisticated, well-read man who was educated at the University of Oxford, and he began his career in British broadcasting at a very young age, and he was actually the BBC's youngest producer at the age of 24. He covered many topics, such as the Profumo scandal, the fall of the House of Romanov, many others in both books and documentaries. He's been highly prolific in his career. And he also toured America in the 1960s, reporting on the tumultuous 60s for the America, the civil unrest, political assassinations, massive street riots. And it seems to have given him a somewhat conspiratorial view of the world, because all of his books tend to have, amongst the journalism and the reporting and the academic research, which is all second to none, they tend to veer towards conspiracies which can be a little bit outlandish, and you can see why they would inspire a novelist like James Ellroy, who can make hay with them in fiction. Okay, so Goddess is not so much a biopic, it's not a cradle-to-grave biography of Marilyn Monroe. It's more like a psychological portrait of a very beautiful, a very talented, and a very intelligent woman who was very well read and was determined to find out as much about the world as she can. And it's quite a loving portrayal in that way. If she was dining with someone, she would read a lot, do a lot of research to make sure she could hold her own, depending on whoever that man might be, a politician or a celebrity in a particular field or whatnot. But also, a very damaged individual, a woman who never found much happiness in either love or sex, or quite had the career, which was so tragically cut short. She never quite had the career as an actress that, her talent demanded. We now look back on a handful of classic films like Bus Stop and Some Like It Hot, but also appearances in brief appearances, early appearances in classic films like The Asphalt Jungle, which are really memorable, and many performers would give their right arm to have these sorts of credits on their resume. But there's been a lot of debate amongst Marilyn Monroe enthusiasts and scholars as to her abilities as an actress, which I find, incredibly stunning. So the book starts off very well, talks about her upbringing, her family, how she actually subsequently made it into the entertainment industry, and how bit by bit she was building her career, while also demonstrating early on some of the flaws or the vices that would lead to her untimely and tragic end. The second half of the book begins to wade more into the conspiracy theories in terms of putting together her relationship with both John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, which is documented very. This is a big book. Practically everyone who knew Marilyn or knew the Kennedys who would talk to Anthony Summers is quoted here. He certainly did his research. And some of the more salacious rumors are certainly explored, some of them are dismissed, and broadly speaking, Summers comes down on a kind of conspiratorial viewpoint, shall we say, that Bobby Kennedy was with Marilyn on the day that she died, that he was subsequently kind of flown out of California to get him away from the scene of the crime, or the scene of her passing, to spare him embarrassment, because they had been having sexual affairs at JFK. and that the mafia, which the Bobby Kennedy was launching a big crackdown on at the time as Attorney General, had tapes or was aspiring to have tapes of Bobby Kennedy and Marilyn together in kind of compromising in flagrante delicto, shall we say. And that is after a long and exhaustive journey that Summers gives you with Marilyn, which is sometimes funny, sometimes tender, is sometimes, like quite personal, almost kind of graphic in some of the affairs and the abortions and the illegal procedures as they were at the time under US law. He gets to that viewpoint. Now, Ellroy read this shortly after it was printed. He actually came across a documentary first, and that was Say Goodbye to the President, which Anthony Summers narrated. And Ellroy remembers vividly finding it in a video rental store at times during his first marriage, taking it out, not even sure if he was going to like it or not, and being absolutely gripped. And then subsequently reading Goddess. And Summers' technique really is like, well, how do you make conspiracy theories plausible and convincing? A few people have done it. I think, obviously, for a while, Oliver Stone did it with JFK. That sent people into a frenzy. And that was a text or film that Ellroy had studied very, very carefully. And the mania around it, because Ellroy was also famously with American Tabloid was going to write about the Kennedys. So he wanted to see how other people were doing it, and he wanted to get his own way. He's much closer to Summers' viewpoint is that be factual, be research things so that you're actually digging up new things, trivia, paraphernalia, whatever you can dig up on it is all good. It's all to the body of scholarship that's going to be produced. There's a lot in here I didn't know. I thought I knew a fair bit about Marilyn Monroe. There is a lot here that kind of floored me, and off to the side before we get to the meat, and then dismiss the outlandish rumors, the outrageous rumors. Dismiss them. That keeps your credibility. And then finally, after all of this research and after dismissing the fanciful, you present your own theory. And of course, it seems convincing and credible, and maybe it's even true. Ellroy took that style as a novelist, and that's what he poured into American Tabloid. Now, American Tabloid, if you've read the outline, which I have, which if you want to read, we'll have to go to Ellroy's archive at the University of South Carolina, was much closer in its first draft, in its outline draft, which is always like a first draft of Ellroy. It was basically Goddess rewritten. Okay, now a few Ellroy fans are not going to like that because American Tabloid, in its final published composition, is Ellroy's masterpiece. I think it's one of 4 or 5 masterpieces that he's produced. Just stunning novels. That are absolutely flawless and certainly got me hooked. It's an emotional one for me because it was actually the first Ellroy I read, and I still love it to this day. But when I read the outline, I was stunned at how much it was kind of like Goddess. In fact, there is even a section of the outline which is titled Goddess and goes completely off the main plot about Kennedy and more about Marilyn Monroe, particularly her death, her final days, and a lot of conspiratorial kind of stuff around that. And why is because Ellroy had begun spending time with Fred Otash, Private Eye stars Fred Otash, who is quoted a lot here, who did the bugging and a lot of the conspiratorial viewpoints. Was the kind of go-to man if you wanted to hotwire a homosexual bathhouse or you wanted to bug a stray husband or something like that at the time. But a number of things got in the way and kind of changed Ellroy's viewpoint as to what American Tabloid should be. First of all, he began to get very, very tired of Fred Otash. He began to see him as a windbag, a guy who was always overstating his role in the affairs of Kennedy and the great events of that time. So Otash, who had been like a lead character in American Tabloid, was cut. The goddess section was cut, and in fact, in the final printed version of American Tabloid, the whole thing about Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe is reduced to a couple of pages, and it's actually kind of debunked. There's a very kind of clever. It's kind of shown to be not true, and like how a rumor gets out which is not true, and that even fools J. Edgar Hoover at one point, who is of course like the big eye in the sky of American tabloid. He sees everything. He's got every little piece of malicious information or gossip which he's filing away in his massive archive. And he even says to his Special Agent Kemper Boyd, "Oh, well done, you had me going there for a while." So the Marilyn Monroe story is completely reduced. And when I first met Ellroy, at the time he was living at the Ravenswood building in LA, it was his divorce crib. He told me flat out, "Oh, I've never liked Marilyn Monroe. I didn't like her as an actress. I didn't like her as a performer. She wasn't even like I didn't have a crush on her, and she's certainly not his style of crush. You know, he likes actresses like Lois Nettleton, um, kind of and anti-glamour actresses. I mean, but very naturally beautiful, but not the kind of smoldering sensualist that kind of Marilyn Monroe was." And I believed. I thought he had zero interest in Marilyn Monroe. Then, only a few years ago, while I'm working on Ellroy's biography, he reaches out to me and he says, "Can you get me a copy of Say Goodbye to the President?" He told me at length about the documentary and how much it inspired him, because he wasn't very tech savvy. This guy doesn't even have a mobile phone. Anyway, I found a copy online. I sent it to him, and that again, it's a very good documentary piece on Bobby Kennedy's links with Marilyn Monroe, and obviously kind of conspiratorial viewpoint. A good line in this book is that Marilyn Monroe could have been Bobby Kennedy's Chappaquiddick, could have absolutely ruined him. So a little bit of a Times Ben's parallel there, but it did, and he escaped by the skin of his teeth. So I got Ellroy the copy. He subsequently writes The Enchanters. Doesn't give me any royalties, but never mind. Now, he subsequently writes The Enchanters, which Ellroy fans watching this will know is his great Marilyn Monroe novel. He brings back Freddie Otash now in a leading role. He goes into a kind of very, very close look at Marilyn Monroe. He's suddenly interested in her. He's a bit critical. He's a little bit kind of tart about her, in terms of, he's still like, I'm not convinced that she was this great performer, or she's still portrayed as like a little bit of a floozy. It's still a bit of a negative portrayal, but suddenly the interest is there. Suddenly he's back on classic territory, especially after the two quartet novels, Perfidia and The Storm, had kind of underperformed and had been a bit underwhelming to long-time Ellroy fans, and probably actually exhausting to read. The Enchanters, by comparison, I don't think it's one of his masterpieces, but it felt like such a relief and such a breath of fresh air. And it reads like a little bit like Goddess. He's gone back to Goddess again, where he'd come so close with American Tabloid. And it was actually Sonny Mehta at North, at Alfred A. Knopf, who said to him, there'd been a few kind of Marilyn Monroe Kennedy novels at the time. They'd all been kind of cheesy and trashy, and he's just like, you don't want to write something like that. First of all, it's derivative. Secondly, it's not even a good derivative. Find your own voice on him. And he did with American Tabloid, and I think that was definitely the right decision. But going back to Marilyn Monroe in more detail with The Enchanters was a great decision. And if you've only just read The Enchanters, read Goddess. I think you'll find it's a gripping read. If you've recently read American Tabloid, read Goddess, you'd be stunned at how different American Tabloid could have been. And I don't buy, actually, Anthony Summers' central premise. I mean, I'm intrigued by it, and he certainly does a really good job of presenting it. But there are flaws here that the critics like Sarah Churchwell have put forward. Like, he interviews Fred Otash at length, and Fred Otash is quoted, but the problem is he's taking Otash's word as gospel. Otash was like this right-wing windbag who was pretty much wanted to overstate his claim on the Kennedys' affairs and discredit him. So, you might not walk away like completely won over to his viewpoint, but, This book inspired a recent Netflix series. There was also the Blonde with Anna de Armas, the film. Our fascination with Marilyn Monroe will grow and grow, and there will be more works, I'm absolutely sure. In the meantime, you could do a lot worse than Goddess. It was a huge influence on James Ellroy, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, I'll see you again soon for another episode of Ellroy Reads. Bye bye.